If you wanted a blatant contrast between Lando Norris, who's very much in the running for the FIA Drivers' World Championship this year alongside his McLaren teammate Oscar Piastri, and Max Verstappen, the 4-time world champion, who's now lying a comfortable third in the Drivers' Championship, still a long way away from the two McLaren drivers, but on the back of 2 wins in a row, must be considered a contender by anybody who follows the sport. If you wanted a contrast between those two drivers, you look no further than the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in Baku today, because Max led from the front, as he was always going to lead from the front, from the pole. Things can go wrong to any racing driver, to any race team, and of course that was always in the background of Max's drive today, but nothing went wrong. He made a perfect start, he was perfect at the restarts, he managed the tyres perfectly, and he won the race with ease, ahead of George Russell in the factory Mercedes. But Lando Norris, and this is where the contrast lies, despite being one of the few drivers to go into the race with the benefit of a new set of medium tyres, he had a new set of hards as well, but that was nothing unusual. But to have a new set of mediums was a big advantage against drivers like, say, George Russell, Kimi Antonelli, Carlos Sainz, Lawson, Yuki Tsunoda, Charles Leclerc, and of course Max Verstappen. But despite that, he got beaten by Max to the tune of over 30 seconds. Yes, Lando beat both Ferraris, but he was slow at the restart. A safety car brought out by, would you believe, Oscar Piastri, who went off on the first lap in virtually the same way that he went off in qualifying. Bunched the field together, obviously, and Lando got passed by Charles Leclerc at the restart. Yes, as I say, he got past the Ferraris, but that's where it ended for Lando Norris. Now, we'll never know, and of course everything is hypothetical, but can you imagine Max Verstappen in that situation, sitting there afterwards for the rest of the race and watching it just disappear like that in a very, very good race car with the benefit of a new set of medium tyres? And that's what happened with Lando Norris. Where was the fire? Where was the aggression? And I think that's the difference. I cannot imagine Max in that car, in that McLaren today, with the benefit of those tyres, with the benefit of the downforce that that car has, not doing anything with it, which is basically what Lando did. Now, here I am sort of kind of criticizing Lando. I'm criticizing Lando in a very general way. Of course, he did a much better job than his teammate this weekend, Oscar Piastri. 2 virtually identical accidents, one on Saturday, one on Sunday, just understeering off into a barrier. But it didn't end there, because his race began right behind Lando on the grid. He was P9 by jumping the start. I mean, in these days where you do nothing but watch the lights, it was an extraordinary mistake. And I guess because of that, flustered at the back of the field now, Oscar just went for it. Medium tyres, new set of medium tyres off the line, like Lando Norris, presumably going to give him some sort of grip advantage. He went around the outside of Esteban Ocon, or tried to go around the outside of Esteban Ocon. He's on the marbles, locked up, straight into the barrier on the outside. An absolutely ridiculous error, particularly after doing virtually the same thing the day before. But that is the difference. I can think of any drivers, past and present, who in Lando Norris's car today, with the tyres that he had, would not have finished whatever it was. Where was he? Down in 7th place, 34 seconds behind the winner, Max Verstappen. Anyway, let's get back to Max, because we shouldn't detract from his performance today. But it's quite difficult to frame it, quite difficult to put it into context, because, for example, both Ferraris messed up qualifying. Lewis Hamilton didn't make it out of Q2. Charles Leclerc crashed in Q3 before he did a time, and so they were never going to be contenders. Max, meanwhile, got the pole, as we said yesterday, as we saw yesterday. And then there was Mercedes, who did a pretty good job overall, and George Russell finished a very good second, still off colour, not feeling great, but starting with the right tyre strategy, i.e. starting on a new set of hards and then going to a used set of mediums at exactly the right moment. Whereas his teammate, Kimi Antonelli, very quick early on medium tyres, going to hard. Not the faster of the two strategies, because the hard tyre had a long opening stint and it was not a slow tyre at all. So any driver that went for that medium to hard option, as distinct from the winning option of hard to medium, was never really going to get the best from the car. The first driver to do so in the results was Carlos Sainz, who started on the front row for Williams, who was on the pole until the dying moments of Q3, and they started him on a used set of mediums, and he did a pretty good job off the line. He was there tucking in behind Max on the first lap, and then at the restart he did a good job. And he finished a good third, beaten by George Russell, as a Williams-Mercedes would be beaten by a properly driven and managed factory Mercedes, and should be. But Carlos Sainz drove beautifully, and I suppose in many ways that was the story of the race, because there he was on the podium, dare I say it, the Ferrari driver that was fired at the end of last year, replaced by Lewis Hamilton. there he was, ahead of both Ferrari drivers, having done a brilliant job. I've said many times that I thought, in terms of his long-term future, Sauber, in brackets Audi, would have been the right team for Carlos to go to, a team with which he could grow organically. But obviously, Williams, as a Mercedes customer, and well run by James Vowles, obviously, was not a bad option. It was never going to be bad. And on this occasion, he definitely upstaged his teammate Alex Albon, who was messy and hit things and hit other cars. So great result for Carlos Sainz, kept it clean and reminded the world, particularly the Ferrari-orientated Formula One world, of how good he is and what a mistake they made, really, to have replaced him last year, because it was a great combination. Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, great combination. As for Ferrari, it was Lewis Hamilton that finished ahead of Charles Leclerc. That's because Hamilton had, as I say, the better of the two tyre strategies. Started on the hard, went to the medium, got a nice long stint, did a very good job of tyre management, whereas Leclerc had to stop earlier. He was on the medium tyre, and then it was too difficult for him in traffic after that. So Lewis will come out of this weekend thinking, yeah, could have done a lot better, shouldn't have had that shunt in FP1, could have done a much better job in qualifying, but the speed was there in the race, and I finished ahead of Charles Leclerc. So he'll be going to Singapore thinking, yeah, the tide is starting to turn, in the sense of Hamilton is kind of there or thereabouts with Charles Leclerc going into a weekend. We'll see how it progresses as we get to Singapore, when we get to Singapore. Kimi Antonelli did finish fourth on the lesser of the two strategies, but did a good job ahead of Lawson, who also did an extremely good job, kept it on the island and got the points with a very clean race in the Racing Bulls, where his teammate Isaac Hadjar on this occasion made more errors and lost a bit of time in traffic, which he was never really able to regain. He finished 10th, the last of the point scorers, but both Racing Bulls in the points again. But Liam Lawson, this was a pivotal moment in terms of his career, also sacked by Red Bull, back in the B team. And here he was doing an extremely good job, beating to the line Yuki Tsunoda, the driver that replaced him and is now at Racing Bull A. Having said all of that, this was by far and away the best weekend yet for Yuki Tsunoda. Given the way he went into qualifying and the way he did qualify, he was always going to be able to score points. He was on a very good tyre strategy again, the hard-medium strategy, exactly the same as his teammates, Max Verstappen. Whether or not he did as good a job as, say, Sergio Perez would have done around Baku, of course, is a very debatable question. A great circuit for Perez, given how good he is with the back end of the car out of a corner with traction and acceleration runs. But Yuki Tsunoda, for the first time, looking like a proper racing driver in the other Red Bull, capable of backing up Max. And I think the other point that needs to be made is that Tsunoda's performance, perhaps even more than Max Verstappen's, shows how much of a step forward Red Bull have taken with that car now, with the new floor and with the updates they had in Baku, about which we spoke on Friday. And I think went a long way towards answering the question, was Monza just a one-off, or have Red Bull really found something new? And I think the answer is yes, that car really is competitive now. And Tsunoda will gain more confidence now. He won't be that far off the pace. He won't be that far off the Max Verstappen pace. He'll be within a second, within half a second most of the time. Well, and that's something that will figure in the minds of McLaren, or should do. And of course, bear in mind, he beat Lando Norris around the Azerbaijan Grand Prix this weekend. Yuki Tsunoda finished ahead of Lando Norris. And I keep making that point because Lando Norris actually had no reason not to finish much better, to have a better race. There were no mechanical glitches. He didn't have any dramas of any type. I suppose the only mistake McLaren made was starting him on the mediums instead of the hard. But I think there's this tendency of, when you are down in the midfield, get on the soft rubber, make a good start, pick up positions off the line. And I think that's probably why they went that route. But if you've got a car that good, and a driver as polished as Lando Norris, let's use that as an adjective, then the race-winning tyre strategy is certainly something you would look at. You look at starting him on the hard and trying to extend that first stint and pick up track position that way. And I was surprised that McLaren didn't do that. So overall, not a good weekend for McLaren on the pit wall, and certainly in the cockpit of the Oscar Piastri car, and to some extent in the cockpit of the Lando Norris car as well. He kept his nose clean, but he didn't benefit in any way from a weekend when his teammate was not scoring. There was Lando Norris not winning a Grand Prix or finishing at least second. He didn't get any advantage at all this weekend, both of them. And I guess Lando went into conservation mode, because when he realized how difficult it was even to beat Lewis Hamilton on that alternative tyre strategy, on the hard-medium strategy, and to get away from the Ferraris, and then he had very little chance then of beating Yuki Tsunoda. When he realized that, he just thought, right, well, we'll just drive for points. what points? P7. So in many ways, this was a sort of Monaco Grand Prix. Once all the damage was done in qualifying, or the brilliance was done in qualifying, then the race was always going to be, okay, press the button and then we'll just run it out. And that's kind of what happened in Baku today. The big surprise, Oscar Piastri making yet another mistake. McLaren not doing the job with the other car, with the Lando Norris car, and I include Lando as part of the team there. Ferrari kind of stuck in the midfield where they were, not as a result of a very poor qualifying session. George Russell doing a very good job in the race, showing his class on a day when he wasn't at his best anyway. But above all, Red Bull just showing how good that car is now, and Max Verstappen showing what a racer he is. Come what may, when all the variables were there in qualifying, it was Max that went through and got the pole in the closing milliseconds of Q3. And once he got the pole, bang, the race was his. Brilliant to watch, as ever. It won't go down as one of the greatest Grand Prix of all time because of the lack of place changes and because of the straightforward nature of Max's win. But if you want another example of how to manage a race and how to run it well, this was it. Providing, of course, that you also look at the job that Max did in qualifying. Baku for me always brings to mind another street circuit that I love, namely Detroit. We don't race there anymore, more's the pity, but we've had some phenomenal Grand Prix there. 86, very good example. Ayrton Senna won for John Player Team Lotus in the Lotus 98T that we're celebrating in the form of the REC 98T Chassis 04 watch, details of which you can find in the description below this video. But that Detroit Grand Prix, Ayrton started from the pole, big battle with Nigel Mansell early on, but Nigel virtually from the first lap in trouble with his brakes. We ran slightly too big with the rear brake ducts and he very quickly glazed the rear brakes. So it was a very difficult race for Nigel thereafter. Ayrton got the lead, started to pull away from Nelson Piquet, but Ayrton then got a puncture, had to come in early and then fought his way back through the field, had to make yet another pit stop for tyres and eventually won from, would you believe, Jacques Lafitte in the Ligier Renault. His teammate Rene Arnoux went very well that day, but Nelson crashed just before the last chicane and the yellows were out for about 6 laps. Rennie acknowledged the yellows, but when they came in, he then hit the PK car, bounced into Terry Bootson's arrows. So it wasn't a good day for Rennie when Ligier could have had a 2-3 finish. As it was Ayrton winning that Grand Prix from Jacques Lafitte. Jacques' last good race really before he broke his legs very sadly at the British Grand Prix a month or so later. So a standout result for Lafitte, that P2 in Detroit, but a standout result for Ayrton Senna as well, his second win of the 86 season. We'll be back with some live streams to get your input between now and the Singapore Grand Prix in 2 weeks' time. In the meantime, a big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, to Track Ninja, to REC Watches, and to you, the viewer, for your support. Take care. See you soon.